Hey guys, it's Tony, and we're back on the bench. And this evening, we're going to be doing another service project on another one of my favorite spinning reels that comes from a favorite line of spinning reels of mine. So, this is the Garcia Cardinal Premier CP1F. Okay, so it's a smaller, light size freshwater reel, and it's going to get a little service, a little cleaning, and a relube. It's a 2-ball bearing reel. So we're just going to dive right in here and we're going to get to it. So this particular line is actually made in Bangladesh, and it's a nice setup. It's just a nicely balanced reel, and I have one of these, and then I think I have multiples of the size 2s and 3s, and I've got 1 4, which is the larger size. And they're all great. They're just a really smooth operator, nice drag systems, and they go together quite nicely, I find. And they're relatively inexpensive reel for the time. Okay, so we're going to start right here, and we're going to have a look underneath here. We're just going to see what we need to clean up. This reel, it's got a little bit of dirt and whatnot, so we're going to just clean it up. And I'm going to take a little Real-X oil here. Okay, and then we've got our drag stack here, and we've got this retainer snap ring in here that we got to get out. And these are a little tricky. I find you really need to have a small flat screwdriver such as this to kind of pry into that to get these out. It's kind of hard to do with a regular pick tool, I find. So as you can see, this is typical of any top drag stack system where, you get some dirt and debris, that builds up in there. So as usual, I like to just lay out these parts one by one, and we're going to go through them and we're going to clean them. But overall, these aren't in bad shape. I don't think. This is a very simple drag stack on this one, actually. It's just the metal washer and just a single drag washer. The larger models have more washers. So we're just going to clean out the inside here. And sometimes I'll take that pick tool and just kind of probe these grooves a little bit with that, just to get any residual dirt that might be holding up in there. Okay, these kinds of drag washers are kind of the rubbery, plasticky type almost, or kind of a nylon, and they don't require any lubrication. Metal goes back in on top, and then we have to get this piece in those holes there, and then we put the ring back on top like so, and then the snap ring on top of that. So as you can see, that's relatively simple, not much to it there. I just want to make sure that that snap ring snaps back in place. Put that off to the side, and now we're going to get into the rest of this here. So we've got these pieces here. We've got a shim, and then a click ratchet. Don't want to lose those two pieces there. Okay, and then on these reels in particular, I think, yeah, we're going to take this bottom off here, this bottom cap. And this is primarily just a protective cap to protect the screw that hides underneath here, basically. So keep those pieces together, and we're going to pop these screws out one by one. Yeah, I've actually been working on all of these reels lately of this line because I want to use them. These are some of my favorite freshwater fishing reels, actually, primarily for lake fishing, and I want to get them ready for some trips this year, or at least I'm hoping to. So this one in particular is a great size for panfish and for trout. And the size 2s and 3s are also good for trout or for bass. And the size 4 is good for, bass and up, basically. Sometimes these are a little hard to pry off, and that's where I usually go to my razor blade to get that underneath there. There we go. And we're just going to clean off this plate while we're here. Yeah, I like the color of these two. It's got that kind of darker metallic green color. Okay, so we said this is a 2-ball bearing reel, so this is one of the ball bearings right here. And I'm looking closely to see if these are stamped or not. But ultimately, I don't feel a lot of roughness in there at all. So what I think we'll do here is we'll just take some WD-40 to that bearing. We'll hose that down in there for the time being while we work on the rest of the reel. Okay, so we've got some old grease here. We're going to work on taking that old grease out as we go. Also make note that you've got a shim, a very thin shim that was hiding under that bearing. Don't want to lose that. And we're going to take the set screw out here right now. So as always, keeping parts is key. Working on any fishing reel. So that's why we have these parts trays nearby here. There's that shim washer. I don't want to lose that. Okay, main drive shaft comes out now. And now we've got the main gear set. You can see we've got a lot of old grease build up in here. Very old, actually. So we're going to clean that out. And we've got a block in there as well. I'm going to pull that off. And crosswind gear. All right, WD-40 to those parts. Also to these screws as well. Okay, and then to continue on in here, we've got a lot of old built up grease that's kind of turning into like a wax almost, and we most certainly want to free that up. We want to get that out of there. We don't want any of that slowing the reel down. And in this case, I'm probably going to be hitting this with some penetrating oil once we get this completely apart, just to clean that out, or maybe some degreaser, we'll see. I find that mild degreasers are not very helpful when it comes to this stuff, and you just kind of have to get in there with a toothbrush and some penetrating oil typically to free that up. Now we've got this nut here. Not sure if I've got the right nut driver on hand for it though. So yeah, that's a 10 mil. Pretty common size for a lot of these rotor nuts on these size reels. And so rotor comes off now at this point. Just want to take a look under here and clean out any dirt or debris. And you can feel free to hit this with some penetrating oil or just a drop of some real oil. And that's going to work its way there. got kind of like a light film of some dirt on here that's a little thick. I also like to take the Q-tip to the sides here and get out any stuff that might be holding up in there. You can see it's actually quite dirty. And that's what happens to, all these fishing reels, is they get dirty and then they get put in a dirty garage sometimes, or a dirty boat, or, whatever, a dirty box, and then they just collect more and more dirt. So, I like to keep my stuff clean as much as possible, because it'll be a lot more reliable when you're out on the water, I find. Okay, and then we're going to go with the real oil here on the bail seams. That's going to work out nicely there. Okay, now we've got the 3 screws here that we're going to pop out. And Abu has done us a favor. They've made it very easy for this to go back in the way that it needs to line up. There's also a couple of studs here, so that's going to be helpful. So far, so good. No roadblocks or anything like that with this reel. It's just in need of this cleaning. And I'm probably going to pause at a certain point and do some of this cleaning. And the way I do that is I give the WD-40 some time to soak in, and then I take toothbrushes and brass wire brushes, clean out all the gear teeth on all those gears, and use some 4-0 steel wool to clean up all the smooth surfaces, essentially. Now here's a note of caution, okay? You want to be careful when you're doing this, because there is a spring in here, a loaded spring, and that's part of your anti-reverse, and you don't want that to go flying away on you or breaking on you or anything like that, okay? So you have to be careful when you're looking at this stuff, but you can see how that works like that. Okay, so sometimes it's good to have this in one position or another, depending on the way that that's loaded. And I can't really quite tell right now, so I'm going to pop off the bearing and the bushing here first. Okay, so it would appear that we've got a roller bearing set up in here. That's the way it looks, at least. And then we've got this spring here. Okay. We've got a lot of old grease buildup in here as well. Okay. It's kind of ironic, because I would almost call this a 3-ball bearing reel if this is in fact a roller bearing, which it appears like it is. You want to be careful doing this, because you don't want those rollers to fall out of their place here. Okay. So at this point, we're going to pause. We're going to clean up all of these parts. We're going to continue using the Q-tips and the WD-40, and we're going to get all these old greases and all these things off of these parts here. Get this reel ready for some reassembly. Okay, so we're back, and we've been spending some good quality time cleaning up all these parts, using lots of these Q-tips here, and some WD-40, steel wool, toothbrushes, cleaning out all these gear teeth. All right, getting this ready to put back together here. We've also cleaned out our inner body here, in its entirety. There's a lot of grease that gets hardened and locked up in a lot of these crevices over time, and so it's always good to kind of go back in there and double check, make sure that you get all that stuff out of there, because when that stuff hardens up, it really does affect the reel in ways that you wouldn't think of necessarily. So now that we've done all that, we're going to start with these pieces here. Also, don't forget, we've got a tiny little spring we got to put back. All right, so we've got our pinion gear. It's nice and clean. And we're going to start with the blue grease on the pinion gear here. Just like so. And then we have a series of parts here. So we've got this washer. And then we have our roller bearing assembly down here at the bottom. Okay, so we've got this collar here first. And I'm going to take just the tiniest little bit of blue grease to this, just a really, really thin layer of it. And that's just going to help prevent any rust damage with those rollers. I'm going to place that back in position. Okay, and then speaking of rollers, so this is the piece that holds those rollers, and they're kind of difficult to see here the way that this is assembled. Okay, but they're slotted in this carriage here essentially. Okay, and all I've done basically is I've taken some WD-40 and I've cleaned this in its entirety. I haven't really taken it apart just because when you do take it apart, these have a tendency to fall out, and so it's helpful to try to avoid that when you can. Okay, but we're going to slide this back over that collar like that. Okay, and then we've got this shield, and then we've got our bearing here that go on top. We're going to flood that with some Real X oil. We cleaned this off with some WD-40 already. We're just going to top it off that way. Okay, and then this whole assembly should go back, give you some slots here to kind of work this through. And sometimes you got to make some adjustments here, but we're going to figure it out as we go. Sometimes you just kind of have to be persistent. Okay, so we've got that set up, and then we've got our spring. And the spring's a little tricky here, I think. So you want to be careful because you really don't want this to go flying away on you. So my suggestion is you just use some caution when you're doing this. You kind of have to be able to press it down in there and flatten it out. Okay, so we've got our spring set in here. We've got our plate, and it's going to go back on. Line up the studs like so, here and here. And then we're going to spin up these 3 screws. You also don't want to over tighten these screws because remember, you are going into plastic. This is just a plastic housing. It's the one downside, working with plastics, they can get brittle over time and crack. But sometimes plastic is good if you do a lot of shore fishing, like I have a tendency to do, because it's light. It's just lightweight. Okay. So now we're ready to place our rotor back on, like so. And we got the rotor nut. And the 10 mil nut driver. Don't need to over tighten it because we've got a set screw that's going to hold that in place. And they've given us 3 positions here to put this screw, which is convenient. Okay. Then we're going to go back to our blue grease here, and we're going to do a little blue grease on here. There's a bushing in here on the inside. That should get a little bit of grease. I'm also going to take just a tiny little bit of Real X oil here and here for that anti-reverse. Okay, now we've cleaned up all these parts here. We got a nice crosswind gear. It's nice and clean. We're going to put some grease on here. On those teeth. Place that in position there. Okay, and then we've got our block. Make sure that you clean underneath here. And then go in with the blue grease there. Put that in place. And then we've taken our 4.0 steel wool to the drive shaft here. And we're going to place the blue grease on that shaft. And we're going to start this. And then we've also got our main gear. And also make note, there's actually 2 shims on here. I saw one originally. It turned out to be 2. So we're going to take the blue grease here. As well as some here. And we're going to set that back in position like so. And then we're going to line up our holes here at the bottom for the block and the drive shaft. Get those holes lined up there. Real X down there. And then we've got our set screw. It's going to go in place there. So it's a relatively simple design, as you can see. There's really no magic to working on this reel. As long as you don't have any broken parts or anything of that sort, should be fine. And then we've got our bearing here, our side bearing. It's been soaking in a little bit of WD-40. And we're just going to place that back in place like so. And then we're going to flood that just with a little bit of real oil on top. And then we're ready to put our side plate back on. Just like that. 3 screws here, here, and here. Not 100% sure, but I think the head on this one down here could be a little smaller. I don't recall what these retailed for new. These reels I think are dated in probably the late 90s, mid-late 90s maybe, somewhere around there. They also had an ultralight model of this series, which I also use from time to time, and it's a fine reel as well. I try to have reels that are application appropriate, more or less, just to have balanced tackle, of course, but to also have, a certain expectation of sport, when you're fighting a fish. And you want to have equipment that can handle that. But also have equipment that's light enough to carry around with you and to also, allow you to have somewhat of a good fight with your catch. So put the cap back at the base here with the little set screw here. This is another spot where you don't really want to over tighten, but you do want it snug because you don't want to go losing the screw. But you don't want to over tighten it because you will actually break these caps if you do. I've actually done it before on other reels. Then we got the click washer and shim to go there. Put the spool back on. And as for the handle, just like to do a little real oil there, a little bit here on the seam, a little bit of blue grease here. And we'll do just a little bead of oil here. It's a smooth operator. Anti-reverse is good there. Tighten up the drag a little bit so we can see how that's working. It's a real nice smooth drag there. And back it off when you're not using the reel. So there you have it. That is the Garcia Cardinal Premier model CP1F ball bearing reel. And it's all serviced and ready to go. So thanks again for watching. This is Tony with Back on the Bench. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please make sure you do subscribe and hit the notification button. And that way you'll get all the updates as to when there are new videos being posted. And I do intend to have quite a few more coming out shortly, so make sure you stay tuned for those, and we'll see you next time.